Hey everybody, I'm Joe. We're talking about Marvel Multiverse and we're doing another character build today. Here we go. Let's start by posing a question that I have wondered ever since I was building characters and running games in the playtest document. And that is, how good is it to attack focus rather than health on a character? I've given this a lot of thought, and I think that there is every reason that you could make the argument that in fact, this is not a good tactic at all. Let me tell you this side of the argument. First and foremost, if you take a character down to 0 focus, they can still attack you. They can still be effective and try to thwart what you are trying to do. In order to truly defeat someone using focus, you have to take their focus to a negative value that's the same absolute value as their max focus, which might be quite a bit. Meanwhile, taking a character down to 0 health renders them unconscious and the fight is over. Not only that, but you have the rest of your team who is likely also attacking health, meaning that you're going to be able to whittle down this amount of health faster because you're working jointly. And so yes, I totally understand that most characters will never go out of their way to attack focus. That makes sense, I get it, but let's examine the other side of the argument for just a moment. First of all, a character is likely to have less focus than health, and so this is a smaller pool of points that you are trying to whittle down than attacking health. Moreover, lots of characters take sturdy or shield powers, which reduce damage multipliers for attacks coming in against health. However, very few characters take the uncanny powers, which reduce the damage multiplier for attacks that come in to attack focus, meaning you're likely to score really big hits when you attack focus. Next, there are some very penalizing consequences to dropping to 0 or negative focus. First, you cannot concentrate on powers, and second, you cannot willingly expend focus in order to use powers, and all of the interesting powers cost focus. So while you may not have taken an enemy and completely defeated them, you have removed the possibility of that enemy using anything interesting. Lastly, taking an enemy down to 0 focus gives them trouble on all action checks. That's pretty great. And this is not to mention the fact that there are some really penalizing abilities that you can potentially use only against enemies that have 0 focus, possession being one of them. Now, I'm not worried about possession because, as I've mentioned previously on this channel, I believe it is just about the hardest power to use in Marvel Multiverse. But I do want to make the case that attacking focus is an absolutely viable strategy. So this is what we are going to do today. We're going to try and build a character whose primary shtick is to reduce focus and to see how penalizing we can make that against our enemies. And along the way, we're going to pick up some pretty cool capacities as well. This is going to be a very fun character at the table to play, and I think also brings along some great roleplay potential. I'm not that good at naming my characters, so if you have a good name for this character, I'd love to hear about it in the comments, but for me, I'll be calling today's character the Wisecracker. We are going to start with origin. I normally don't have much to say about origin because it normally adds only some flavor to your character rather than something we mechanically want to examine. But with today's character, origin is actually essential. We not only need to go into the magic power set, but we need to go into 2 different schools of magic to pull off what I want to pull off today, and we need to think that through. In order to take one of the 3 subsections of magic, you need to actually have an origin that allows for it. So we are going to go into the demonic magic origin. I love the description of this. Your character taps into or is cursed by the powers of hell. They may be a native of one of the 9 circles of hell, or their powers might simply have come from a hellish source. In our case, our powers need to come from a hellish source, and not just any hellish source, but some kind of a chaotic hellish source, for reasons that will make sense. You're going to want to talk this character concept over with your narrator, but because we're going to find a mechanical way to build it, it really should not be a problem. This is going to give us access not just to the basic magic powers, but to the demonic magic powers. As for our occupation, I actually think that we have been recruited by Hell to be a soldier for some kind of cause with Hell, or perhaps it's part of our backstory. I think that being a soldier of chaos is a really fun and iconic concept. You can bring it to life with all kinds of character choices, but we are going to be taking the military occupation. But note that for me, this is a demonic military. All of the really good roleplay potential aside, the military occupation gives you lots of advantages. It's one of the best occupations in the game. First of all, it gives you battle ready. Battle ready, as we know, gives you 30 additional points of focus. We're going to be spending a lot of focus on this character, and so just having 30 extra points is great. The next trait we get from our occupation is situational awareness. This gives us an edge on all initiative checks. We're going to go relatively early in combat, which is pretty awesome. Lastly, we are going to get the connections trait for military. Now, because I have envisioned this as a demonic military organization, I think this trait is going to be a little less useful than it is on other characters, but we've got to stay true to the concept that we've pitched and that we're trying to build. That said, connections is one of my favorite traits in the game, and you should be able to use this to gather appropriate information as you go forward. We're going to talk about the trait we're taking at rank 1 right now, way earlier than I normally do. And that's because the trait we're taking is really essential to the concept of the character, and you need to talk about this with your narrator. We're going to be taking the trait Extraordinary Origin, which gives us an additional origin. You can select this trait multiple times, but each time must be cleared with your narrator. Since we're doing it right away at rank 1, it really shouldn't be a problem, but you're going to want to talk this out, that you want your character to be connected to a chaotic, demonic entity of some form, which will give you access to chaos magic and demonic magic. We really want both of these parts of the power set for this character, so make sure to talk it over initially. But this is mechanically how we are going to be able to pull powers from both sets. Let's go ahead and do point buy. We're going to take a -2 in our melee in order to give us a little bit more wiggle room. We're going to max out our ego at a 4, put 1 point into vigilance, and put 2 points into resilience. We are going to have defenses of an 8 for melee, a 10 for agility, 12 for resilience, 11 for vigilance, 14 for ego, and a 10 for logic. So we have 4 powers that we're going to pick up, and I'll start with the boring ones. We're going to take Sturdy 1 to take 1 damage reduction on this character. Eventually, we're going to get some pretty crazy defense stats on this character, but we're going to be a little bit squishy in the meantime, so we need to take Sturdy early in order to give us a little bit of a buffer. The next really basic power is going to be Discipline 1, which gives us a 1 damage multiplier for all attacks that use ego, and that is going to be our primary attack stat on this character, though, as we will see, it will not always be our only attack stat. The next power we're going to take is Sense Sins. You could go a different direction. You could take Uncanny 1 here if you wanted to, and I totally would understand, but it's just too flavorful to leave on the table. Sense Sins allows us to make an ego check, and upon a success, we know the terrible things that the person we're speaking to has done. Upon a fantastic success, we know the terrible things they're planning to do. It's just too much fun, it's too flavorful, and it gives you some interrogation capacity outside of combat, which is awesome. But the main power we're going to take at this rank is Penance Stare. Penance Stare allows us to make a single action ego attack. It costs no focus, and upon a success, we do focus damage to our target. Upon a fantastic success, they take double damage and are paralyzed for 1 round. One thing that's great for us is that characters with the heroic tag take half damage, but we're taking this on a hero, so anyone we attack should not have the heroic tag, meaning that this part of the clause is going to be nullified for our purposes. There are some stipulations inside of this power about how a shattered character might recover over time from this power affecting them. They will be forever changed in some way, and this is something to deal with your narrator, but it could lead to some really fun character change and reversals over the course of a full campaign. Combat is really straightforward for us. We get within 3 spaces of an enemy and we start doing Penance Stare. Upon a regular success, we're going to do on average 11 focus damage, and upon a fantastic success, that's going to be 16 damage. Let's get into rank 2. We're going to bump Ego to a 5, take Vigilance to a 3, and take Resilience to a 4. So we're really bumping up these middle stats, our focus and our health, and you'll notice I am completely ignoring melee, agility, and logic on this character. If you wanted to put points into these aspects of the character for non-combat checks, I would totally understand. It makes a ton of sense. It means that we're not great at our action non-combat checks, and it means that right now our defense scores are pretty poor. We're sitting at an 8 for melee, 10 for agility, 14 for resilience, 13 for vigilance, 15 for ego, and a 10 for logic. You'll notice I have not taken the wisdom powers or evasion powers on this character, and I'm not going to, for reasons that will become clear very soon. All right, let's talk about some powers I am not taking on this character. First of all, I am not taking Brain Drain, and you might have expected that I would. Brain Drain is a really good power. It's one of those powers that is triggered off of having a character grabbed, so you must use an action to grab a character, then use your reaction to use Brain Drain. But upon using it, we are able to make an ego attack and drain focus from our target. They lose focus and we gain it. Now, the big benefit of this power is that we can regain focus, and that's nice. Don't get me wrong, it really, really is, but it's going to use our action and our reaction in order to remove focus from a target. And I would have to put more points into my melee stat than I really want to do. And as a result, this is just going to take too much away from the character build and from my action economy to really be useful. The second that I'm able to use a reaction to take away someone's focus, which by the way is happening at this rank, I'm going to be able to do twice as much focus damage per round of combat than I would if I relied on Brain Drain. So it's really not that effective for my purposes. If you went into this power, I certainly would understand it's a different build, but it is effective. Next, I'd like to point out that we could combine this character with some reaction powers in the ranged power set. Things like covering fire, which are going to allow you to use a reaction to fire at somebody and do focus damage rather than health damage. And this is really good, don't get me wrong. It allows you to operate from a greater range than we otherwise would be able to do, and that's powerful. However, same problem, it does ask us to invest in our agility. Right now, I'm focusing on getting as much focus and health as I possibly can. And as a result, I'm not going to be that effective with my agility as an attacking stat. It's going to be a tertiary stat for us on this character unless we wanted to totally flip the concept. So please note, there is a character build where you use the ranged power set in order to make attacks against an enemy's focus in your reaction. But we're going to be able to do it for our action and our reaction. So things like covering fire are not going to come into play for us. But let's talk about what is. First of all, we're going to take Sturdy 2, and now we're going to have 2 damage reduction on this character, which is great. And we're going to take Discipline 2, so now we have a 2 damage multiplier for our ego-based attacks, which the Discipline power does not specify that they must be attacks against health. It is any attack roll that uses focus as the attacking stat. So anything that attacks focus does count. We also get a +2 to any non-combat checks that use ego, like persuasion. The next power we're going to take is combat trickery. I really haven't taken this in a little while on a character that I've worked on, and that's because I don't always feel a need to make fantastic successes happen a lot, but look at everything that happens with a fantastic success for us. We are able to double focus damage and paralyze enemies, and that is just too good to pass up. And so combat trickery allows us to use our reaction to roll an attack, and after the roll, decide that the Marvel die is a 1, thus guaranteeing a fantastic success once per combat. And we will definitely be using that on this character. I've already been talking about reactions on this character, so we need to get into what reaction power allows us to attack focus and allows us to do so with ego. And the answer is Wisecracker. Wisecracker is a reaction that is triggered in one of 2 ways. The first is our character succeeds on an attack against an enemy that is within earshot, so it can be at range, or an enemy fails an attack against us. And please note the wording of fails and attack in the first section. These are going to be important for when Wisecracker can be triggered. First of all, Wisecracker can be triggered by Penance Stare. Penance Stare is an ego attack roll. As a result, we can use our action to do a Penance Stare and immediately do a reaction with Wisecracker, thus doubling down on the amount of focus damage that we are able to do. And one of those absolutely can use combat trickery if we have the reaction to spend, which, spoiler alert, we will. The second part of the reaction trigger is important, that the attack fails. Let's discuss this briefly. If someone attacks you and misses your defense score, that is a failure. If someone attacks you and you throw up an energy protection, that attack hits the energy protection and does no damage to you, but the attack did not fail, so Wisecracker could not be triggered. If you had the blink power, or the blink barrage power, or perhaps quick phase, which allow you to use a reaction to either teleport or become incorporeal, the attack fails to hit you because you have either become incorporeal or teleported out of the way. In those situations, Wisecracker would trigger. As a result, one good way to build this character is to pair it with the teleportation power set. Take blink, and you don't need to take much more, and now you're going to be able to blink out of the way with one reaction, and then use Wisecracker with a second reaction in order to do focus damage. It's important to note that that does take 2 reactions, and of course we're going to be taking combat reflexes on this character naturally, but importantly, if you use one reaction for the Wisecracker triggered off of Penance Stare, you do not have 2 reactions remaining to blink out of the way and do a second Wisecracker. That's a total of 3 reactions. As a result, I won't actually be taking blink on this character, but I'd like to point out it is a completely valid strategy and would trigger Wisecracker if you have the reaction to spare. I am not going to be doing that. I will be saying that you could do it and say that it would be a very valid choice for you to go, but I want both my reactions to be actually available for Wisecracker. That might seem a little bit weird because my defense scores are so low that everything is hitting me right now, but it's going to become really good next rank, so stick with me. As it is for right now, Wisecracker is amazing, and we definitely are going to be using it as often as we can in order to just double down on the amount of focus damage we can do. But the really big power we are taking at this rank is Hellfire Chains. It requires us to be a rank 2 character. It is 5 points of focus. It does require our concentration, and it is a standard action to cast it, so this would replace, for the moment, Penance Stare. The target of this can be as far away as 10 spaces per rank, which right now is 100 feet away. We can do this at serious distance. And please remember that Wisecracker operates to anybody within earshot. So you're going to want to talk to your narrator about how loud are you? We make an ego attack against them and cover them in Hellfire chains. Upon a success, they take health damage. I know, we're attacking focus, so this is weird, but stick with me. On a fantastic success, they are grabbed and they are paralyzed as well. I might want to use combat trickery to guarantee paralysis on this target, even though that would minimize my focus damage. This might seem a weird power to take because, yes, grabbing and paralysis are fantastic conditions, but it's not the point of this character. Why would I take Hellfire chains when I'm trying to do focus damage? And the answer is in the next paragraph. So let's take a look at the second stipulation here, and it is this. If we have a target that is grabbed by Hellfire chains, on subsequent rounds, and I want to read this word for word for you, the character, us, can make an ego check, please remember, against the target's resilience defense to inflict health damage and focus damage. Breaking free from Hellfire chains requires a melee check with a target number of 20. Let's take a look at this because it's actually quite interesting. You'll notice what is not stipulated inside of this power, that the ego check against resilience does not stipulate that it takes an action to do, meaning this is outside of our action economy. It does not cost an action or a reaction in order for this to work, which is pretty awesome. Next, we're doing health damage, which is fine, and focus damage. We get to stack this with our actions and our reactions, which basically gives us an additional focus attack for free. So most of the time, I am assuming we are going to be using combat trickery to guarantee that Hellfire chains grabs our enemies. If they are paralyzed on their turn, they remain grabbed until our turn, guaranteeing that we get to pull off a Hellfire chains check, a penance stare action, and still 2 reactions on our next turn, which is fantastic. There's one more great thing about Hellfire chains, and it's the fact that it is an ego check, not an attack roll, and that pairs with the discipline powers. I normally say that you get a +1 benefit to checks made outside of combat with things like discipline or brilliance or accuracy, etc. But that's actually not true. I'd like to read you the wording of the discipline powers. We have discipline 2 at the moment. The character adds a +2 to their ego damage multiplier, great, and they gain a +2 to ego checks other than attacks. That doesn't say that it's outside of combat, it just say it can't be an attack roll. Please note the wording of Hellfire chains. We make an ego check, not an ego attack. As a result, the benefit from discipline stacks on top of your roll to do damage, focus and health damage with Hellfire chains once they are actually on your target. This means that the subsequent damage from Hellfire chains benefits from an additional bonus. You're never going to miss with this additional damage, and it's outside of your action economy. So yes, this is a great way for us to use our first action in combat. As I have been alluding, the trait we're taking at this rank has to be combat reflexes. It gives us 2 reactions per round of combat, which means we get combat trickery and Wisecracker, or we get 2 Wisecrackers. It's awesome. So combat for us is going to take 1 round of setup. We're going to do Hellfire chains and combat trickery. That is going to guarantee that we grab and paralyze our enemy, which means they are still grabbed when our turn comes back around. At that point, we unload on them. We are going to use 1 penance stare, we're going to use our ego check with Hellfire chains, and ideally 2 Wisecrackers. If we pull all of that off, we do, on average, 76 points of focus damage and 19 points of health damage on 1 ideal round of combat. That is a grand total of 98 points of damage. All right, let's do point buy for rank 6. We're going to bring resilience to a 6, vigilance to a 5, and ego to a 6. This is going to give us defenses for the moment of an 8 for melee, 10 for agility, 16 for resilience, 15 for vigilance, and 16 for ego, with a 10 for logic. But as I just said, that's not actually going to matter. Now, why in the world would I say that our defense scores do not matter? And the answer is our first power, which is, I can't believe I've never taken this on a character build here before. It is Protective Hex. Protective Hex requires our concentration and 10 points of focus. We want to get this started at the beginning of the adventuring day, but the effect is amazing. We produce a hex to protect us. We make a single ego check, which means it interacts with discipline, and that check is now the defense score for all incoming attacks. You heard me right. All attacks independent of the actual ability score they attack are now going to go up against this ego check. If we don't like the result, we can always spend 10 more points of focus and roll it again. Upon a fantastic success, we're granted an additional damage reduction, which is nice. So let's talk about this. We have a max ego, and we're going to be taking discipline 3 on this level, which means we're going to have a pretty massive bonus to our roll. And from here on out, I'm just assuming that at the beginning of the day, you're going to do Protective Hex and you're going to bump all of your defense scores. The average dice roll of 3d6 is 10.5, and when I'm calculating damage, I always take any fractional amounts and round down. But in this case, I will not be doing so. I'll be rounding up. The reason is very simple. If you roll lower than average, I am just going to assume that you're going to spend 10 more points of focus and do it again. And as a result, I feel comfortable giving an average that is rounded up rather than rounded down. From this point on in this character, I'll be saying what our average and max defense scores are. But right now, your defense scores all get replaced at the beginning of the day with an average of 20 and a max of 27. Protective Hex is straight up the best way to defend yourself on the front line of combat. And it gets better the more invested in ego you are, and it gets better the more discipline powers you have. And as a result, I am going to be using this on a lot of tank builds in the future, but it's just amazing because it defends all incoming attacks, and there's nothing else in the game that does that. Of course, we're going to be pairing Protective Hex with Discipline 3. This is going to give us a 3 damage multiplier for all ego attacks, and it's going to give us a 3 bonus to our Hellfire Chains check, and more importantly, to Protective Hex. And if something does manage to hit us, and I don't know how it will, we're going to pick up Sturdy 3 to give us 3 damage reduction, which is going to be awesome. So the reason we've been putting all of our points into our resilience and our vigilance is so that we have tons of hit points and tons of focus. This character is going to get hit a lot in early games, so we need lots of health. And we're going to be spending a lot of focus, and so we need lots of vigilance. As a result, we are now in a good position to use our next power, which is Powerful Hex. Powerful Hex allows us to, and I want to quote here because the wording is important, cast a hex that allows us to use any other power that we have the rank to use. So it bypasses everything except for rank requirements, even if we would not normally meet the power's other prerequisites. Now, the duration says varies, which means the hex is the usage of the power, but it is done as a standard action. The cost for this is whatever the focus cost of the power is plus 5. And so every time that we want to use another power, we must spend the power's focus plus an additional 5, which is why we're going to frankly spend a lot of focus on this character, but that's okay. We have a lot of it to spend. We're going to be all right as far as that goes. If a power is permanent, it is now concentration for us. So we could pick up something like flight here, which normally would be permanent, but for us is now concentration until we drop concentration, meaning that we would have to cast it again. Additionally, if a power is one in a series that has a number, the example given is Mighty 3, we must spend 5 points of focus for every level. So if we wanted to pick up Mighty 3, it would cost 15 focus. This is insanely powerful. This is going to give you the capacity to do almost anything in the game. The original version of this character went into omniversal travel at rank 4 to pick up a lot of travel, and I realized I don't need to do that. I can just copy it with powerful hex. If I want to blast someone with some energy control, I can just copy it. It's fine. I can do almost anything I want at this point. The options are endless here, but I think the standout options are resize, teleportation, quick phasing, invisibility, and energy control for blasting. So at this point, you have all of the mobility that you want. You could pick up flight. You could pick up some spider powers to climb up on walls. You could pick up jump powers, so I would just pick up flight. And you have insane mobility, but there's only one problem, and it is the action economy of Powerful Hex. Powerful Hex specifically is an action to use, which means it doesn't actually interact with reaction abilities. The blink reaction, the quick phase reaction, the energy protection reaction powers. None of those interact with Powerful Hex because we must use Powerful Hex as an action, even though it technically could give us the ability to use a reaction power. We would just be using it as our action. And I know that the thinking might be, what if I used Powerful Hex to allow me to use any other power and then use my reaction to do it, such as the blink powers? The problem is the duration says varies. So the action of Powerful Hex is an action to use. Varies is the duration, meaning that the duration must be the duration of the power. So I can't use Powerful Hex to hold concentration on Blink because Blink is not a concentration power. As a result, this just does not interact with reaction powers. So they're the only thing that isn't really allowed with this particular power. The other thing that is important to keep in mind with Powerful Hex is that the power that you are copying is actually the one that stipulates how you make an attack. So for instance, it is things, if you copy something in the super strength power set, they say that you make close or melee attacks, saying that you would have to use your melee score to use the power. The same would be true for anything that used logic. The same would be true for anything that used agility. And our agility, melee, and our logic scores are kind of garbage. So you might think that this is not as good as it initially seems because our ability scores don't interact with it very well. Don't worry, we're going to look at that. But for right now, anything with mobility, anything with utility, and anything that uses ego, those are the main things to use with this power. The next power we're going to take is Possess Vehicle. Possess Vehicle we're taking just because it is so fun. We magically take control of a vehicle that we are inside of or touching. Hellfire engulfs the outside of the vehicle. That's just for flavor purposes. It doesn't do damage. And if anyone comes into contact with it, they take regular damage with a damage multiplier equal to our rank. Upon a fantastic success, it's health and focus damage. Now you might say we could use the vehicle to do damage. We could have it run around and hit people. The problem is that first, it's not exactly clear that the vehicle gets its own turn in initiative. Some narrators might rule that the vehicle moves on its own, which would be cool, in which case you might use it to ram people, but it also might take your action, depending on your narrator, to actually drive it. Alternatively, it might take your movement, in which case you'd have to be physically inside the vehicle. This is a valid strategy, but I don't know how your narrator is going to actually determine the ruling on using your vehicle as a combatant because it is not specified. So I'm going to be conservative and say that that is not happening. Additionally, if I were to have my possessed vehicle ram somebody, it is reasonable to say the vehicle would take damage, and I don't want to destroy my cool possessed car. So for purposes of having the vehicle for utility, and because the ruling is not specified, I'm going to say we are not using our vehicle to do damage, and I will not be adding it to the focus damage or health damage that we calculate. It's just here for fun. The trait we're taking at this rank is going to be signature attack for Wisecracker. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. You've made all of this ruling about Hellfire chains. Why is Hellfire chains not your signature attack? And there are a couple reasons. First of all, the thing we care about from Hellfire chains is not technically an attack, it's a check. And so there's every reason to say that a narrator might rule that the initial attack would interact with signature attack, but the subsequent check would not. Now, it's possible that they would rule that it does, which would be cool and would give you an edge, but I don't feel I need an edge since it does interact with the discipline bonus. Secondly, we're using our Hellfire chains once per turn, and ideally we're using Wisecracker twice per turn. As a result, I'm going to get more mileage out of Wisecracker than I am out of Hellfire chains or Penance Stare. And so we will be having that extra edge on Wisecracker. Thank you very much. I'm going to enjoy that. So what does combat look like for us? Well, we assume we have Hellfire chains up and running. We're going to get to do a Hellfire chains, a Penance Stare, and 2 Wisecrackers, and that is going to give us an average focus damage on a complete round of combat of 108 focus and 27 points of health damage. It's important to note at this point that most enemies that are presented in the core rulebook and the Cataclysm of Kang only have about 90 points of health, meaning we could cripple them in around a single round of combat, 1 to 1.5 rounds of combat. That's incredible. At that point, that character is effectively off the board for any really scary attack purposes. I am actually going to delay our point buy for this rank until after I discuss powers for reasons that'll be clear in just a moment. We're not going into a new power set. In fact, you'll notice we've only ever gone into the magic power set, and I will not be going into another power set on this character. I don't need to. I have powerful Hex, but we are going to take 2 more basic powers. The first one is Sturdy 4. Sturdy 4 is going to give us a 4 damage reduction just in case something does magically hit us. And we will be taking Discipline 4, the last of the Discipline powers. This is going to be a 4 damage multiplier for our ego attacks and a +4 to ego checks, which will include Hellfire chains, which is nice. That leaves us with 3 powers, which I will not be taking. In the core rulebook, they added the ability for you to forego taking a power in exchange for adding a +1 to a single ability point. Remember how we said a little while ago that the problem with powerful Hex is that our ability scores just weren't good enough to really use it? We're going to start fixing that right now. So I'm going to forego the next 3 powers that we have at rank 4 and get 3 more points to spend, meaning I get 8 points to spend at this point buy. Using those 8 points, I'm going to get melee up to a 0. I'm going to get agility to a 1. I'm going to max out resilience, vigilance, and ego at a 7 each. That means that without protective Hex, I'm going to have defenses of 10 for melee and logic, 11 for agility, and 17s for everything else. But as you know, that's not actually going to be our defense score. No, our average defense score is going to be a 22 with a max defense score of 29. Now, we're not great at using melee, agility, or logic attacks yet. That's going to take till next rank to really get super good at using all of these disparate powers, but we are going to have tons of health and focus. Specifically, we're sitting at 210 points of health with Sturdy 4 and 240 points of focus, and that's because of Battle Ready that we had at the beginning. So tons of focus to spend, tons of health to chew through, and insane defense scores. If you're thinking that this character is starting to look like a tank, you're not wrong. The trait we're going to take is going to be Iron Will. Iron Will gives trouble on any ego-based attack that is used to try to influence or control our mind. Our character gains an edge on ego checks to break free of mind control or other compulsions. I don't know how often this is going to come up in your game, but it just shores up another defense for this character, and I think really fits. Our strategy in combat is not changing. If we have Hellfire chains up and running, a penance stare, 2 Wisecrackers, we're going to be doing 140 points of focus damage and 35 points of health damage on average in a complete round of combat. Point buy for rank 5 is going to be very strange for us because we are taking no powers whatsoever here on out. For the rest of this character's career, we're not taking new powers. Why would we? We have powerful hex. We want to be better at using powerful hex. And so at this rank, I'm going to be able to get agility, resilience, vigilance, and ego all to an 8, which means we are now adding any agility-based attack that you want to copy with powerful hex into your repertoire. You're going to be amazing at using all of them. Plus, you have tons of hit points and tons of focus, and your, of course, ego attacks are going to be insanely good. So you'll probably also want to copy accuracy 4. It's going to cost you 20 points of focus, but who cares? It's totally worth it. And now you are the best sniper in the team as well. The trait we're going to take at this rank is Monster. I'd like to point out, this whole time we have been a demonic, chaotic entity that made a pact with a military from hell. We are a scary character, and I think we should have been leaning into that this whole time. Monster doubles down on it, and if you wanted to take this a rank earlier, I wouldn't blame you, right? Here's what Monster does. We are a monster, a legend that is spoken of, and we have an edge whenever we attempt to intimidate somebody. Please note, intimidation is usually ego-based. We have maxed out our ego, and we have discipline 4 for intimidation checks, and now we have an edge on them. And we're a super scary monster. I love it, it's fun, it's cool, I'm grabbing it. Joe from the future here. I'm editing this video and realized that as I did my damage report at rank 5, I had a typo inside of my document, and so thus the change in sweater. Anyway, our average defense score is going to be a 23 with a max of 30. And if we are able to get everything to work on a full round of combat, we're going to do on average 158 points of focus damage and another 39 points of health damage. Let's go ahead and take this character and max them out at rank 6. And by max them out, I'm serious about it. We're taking no powers at rank 6. We're going to take 5 additional ability score points plus the 5 that we already have access to from the rank, meaning that we are going to be able to get agility, resilience, vigilance, and ego to 9s, and you have a choice. You can either put logic at a 6 or melee at a 6, or you can split the difference. You're going to see on the screen that I'm putting logic at a 6 just because it gives me access to the telepathy powers, to telekinesis. But if you wanted to go into melee and start going into resize powers with the powerful hex, I certainly wouldn't blame you. It's a lot of fun. Go for it. The trait we're going to take is Fearless. We are extremely brave and have an edge on any action check that requires us to deal with fear. It just, again, fits the theme of the character, and I like the way that it's going to kind of work. So we're adding that in, but you could also just do Taster's Choice for whatever trait you wanted. I thought this just kind of fit with our monstrous vibe. For our last combat tactics report, nothing is changing for us, but if we get our Hellfire chains, penance, and 2 Wisecracker off, we are going to do on average 176 points of focus damage and 44 points of health damage in an average round of combat, and our defense scores are going to be an average of 24, and our max defense, if we roll all 6s, is going to be 31. All right, so let's do some final thoughts. This character is pretty insane, right? We're doing monstrous, crazy stuff and eventually able to copy any power in the game, which is going to be amazing for us. We just needed the ability score points. You'll notice I did not take possession on this character, so let's talk about that. So possession is a concentration power. It normally costs 20 points of focus. For us, it would be 25 because we'd be accessing it through powerful hex. We make an ego check with trouble against somebody who has no focus left, and upon success, we possess them. There are lots of checks they get to make to try to end this condition. If we ask them to harm someone, they get to do a check. If they have the heroic tag, they get an edge on the check. If we ask them to harm themselves, they automatically get an edge on the check. And if we ask them to harm themselves and they are heroic, they get a double edge. I pulled off possessing a player at my table, but because they were a hero and I was running a villain, they immediately broke out of it, which was a little bit disappointing. That said, being able to possess someone is super powerful. And of course, if you took possession as a power, you could do a trait in order to make this a signature attack and negate the trouble. But since this is a check, not an attack, discipline interacts with it. So you're pretty likely to pull this off. That said, this is a valid tactic for a character that takes people down to 0 focus. We will take people to 0 focus regularly. And as a result, starting at rank 5, you can then take possession of them and use them as another combatant on the battlefield. Or just tell them to walk away, or to dig a trench, or tie their shoes a million times, or whatever. There is a lot that you can do with possession, and I know that it is the obvious low-hanging fruit on the tree to grab when you've taken someone down to 0 focus, and I say go for it. But I'd like to point out that taking people down to 0 focus has a lot of potential outside of possession. We don't get this until rank 5, and that's pretty late in the game to start playing with your favorite toy. I think being able to simply take somebody and cripple them in the fight or shatter them is even more fun. And being able to copy any power in the game is incredibly powerful, not to mention the fact that we have the best defense scores in the game. The downside of this character is that they're not going to kill almost anybody. They do very, very little health damage. And as a result, I do not believe this is a viable character in a small party game with 1 or 2 player characters. But if you have a full table, 4 or 5 heroes, this is an incredible character to be able to bring to the table. You're going to be able to do almost anything you want. You're going to be able to play around with your favorite parts of Marvel Multiverse. You're going to have amazing defenses, and you're going to be able to cripple your enemies with basically insulting them to death. I think this character is incredibly fun and does have a lot of potential at the table. And simply demoralizing an enemy is great because of one additional thing having to do with enemy stat blocks. I don't know if you've noticed looking at enemy stat blocks, but monsters in the core rulebook and Cataclysm of Kang, they don't have any karma. That's something reserved for heroes. And so karma is what is expended to do recovery checks. So if a hero takes a villain down to 0 focus, they do not mechanically, unless they're homebrewed, have the ability to spend a point of karma and do a recovery check to regain focus. Once it's gone, it's gone. So yeah, to answer our original question, I think this is a viable character. I think this is a viable strategy if you have a large enough team to support it. Anyway, that's the character build for the week. I hope you liked it. YouTube is made out of buttons. I hope you press some of them, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.